Well, greetings, Robert Locke. Thanks for hanging out with us today. We're going through a series of myths about property management, things that most property managers kind of believe on the surface, but when you tease them out, pull them apart a little bit, they're maybe not quite as true as you might think. So the one we're talking about today is myth number 26. And number 26 goes something like this. As an agent of the owner, a professional property manager should defer to the owner to approve and deny applications for rent, right? Well, that's commonly thought of in many sections of the property management industry, but really when you tear it apart and break it down, you find that there's some other things you should consider. Now, there's kind of two camps here, and there are a few in the middle. We're going to talk about that so that you get a perspective. You can identify who you are and whether or not you really want to be doing it the way you're doing it. So let's talk about that. There are some people who, to that question, would say, yes, you should defer to the owner, and other people that are just as adamant and will say no. So let's look at some of the reasons that each of them would give. The people say yes, say it's the owner's property, and they should decide who rents the property. Owners like that. Owners think they should have a say in it, and that's one of the reasons why a certain slice of the property management industry kind of goes to the owner for approval and denial. Another reason they give is, I'm just the facilitator, it's not my call. And the last one is, I don't want to be held accountable for a wrong decision. Well, the first two are people who most of them come out of the sales industry. They've done listing and selling, and they know from that experience that they don't make any decisions for the owner. They're a facilitator, they're a scribe. They bring issues and decisions to the owners. They don't make any of the decisions. In a selling and listing situation, the owner makes all the decisions. If you come out of that part of the industry, this is going to be harder for you, but it's an important learning curve because it'll make a big difference in your business as you grow it up. These people just don't want to be held responsible. And I understand that. When we were new in the business and it only qualified 50 people, we didn't have much experience. After you qualify 1,000 or two, you get a lot of experience. You find out what works and who lies and how they lie and how do you trap them in their lies and who are good tenants and who will give all the information that you need, and you kind of learn it as you go along. But this is very common for people who come out of the brokerage business. They won't admit it to themselves, but they push the decision over to the owner because they really don't want to be held accountable for a bad tenant. I understand that. Okay, those who say, no, we don't go to the owner for these decisions, would say the owner isn't prepared or trained to make these decisions. You and I in the management business sit in classes all the time on fair housing, on qualifying, all kinds of education. We kind of know what the issues are. Owners don't, and so the people who would say, no, you don't go to an owner with an approval or denial question, you make the decision yourself, they would argue the owner really isn't trained to do that. Secondly, they would argue that's what they're paying me for. In other words, they're paying me a fee to do this. I should step up and do it. Okay? They would also argue one other thing, that the owner prejudices can get them and the property manager into trouble. And that's one of the things you find if you've been doing this for a little while, that if the owner says no because they have a comfort pet or need a wheelchair ramp or they're disabled or they have, not quite as high a credit score as the owners, owners, or they think 3 guys moving in is not healthy or unmarried couples moving in are not healthy. So this is very legitimate. Many managers say, I'm not going to give the owner a say in it because they might screw it up and I might get dragged in for facilitating a fair housing claim. So that's what many people argue. Now, before we move beyond this, I need to take a little side trip. You may have seen part of this. I'll go through it quickly. I want to talk about this issue of agency. The question is, what does it really mean in the world of sales? Because it means something in the sales world, and in the property management world, it means something completely different. So we got to pause our first conversation and kind of deal again with this small a, big A agency issue. So let's talk this through a little bit. The word agency is used in all kinds of different scenarios. A small A agent I would describe as somebody that came out of the listing and selling business. I listed and sold for 20 years, made a good living at it. But when I signed up a listing with an owner, I didn't make any decisions for him. I was an agent, but I was a small A agent, meaning I was a facilitator. I moved information around. I did what the owner asked me to do. I didn't make any decisions. I didn't have any authority, okay? You're really looking out for them. You're holding confidences, but you make no decisions. So if you come out of the brokerage community, the sales community, this is kind of who we were, who I was for the first 20 years doing listing and selling. Now, if you've ever had an opportunity to go to a closing on behalf of one of your owners under a power of attorney, you are a different kind of agent. You're known as a big A agent. Some of the characteristics of that would mean you actually stand in their shoes. You make decisions for them. You act as them. When you walk into a closing with a power of attorney to represent a seller, the closing attorney sees you as the seller, and they'll take your signature as the seller. You get to make decisions for the seller under a power of attorney. You're authorized in a management agreement to make a whole bunch of decisions for the owner. You don't have a medical power of attorney. You can't put the owner in a medical institution. You don't have a power of attorney to sell a house. But in the property management agreement, we are given all kinds of authority to make decisions on behalf of the owner within certain parameters. And so where salespeople tend to operate down here, property management industry tends to move up the ladder this bit. We're not all doing this totally on behalf of the owner, but we are making an awful lot of decisions for the owner under what I call more of a big agency model. And there's a list of duties in the management agreement where authority is given to you, or we as property managers, to make an awful lot of decisions. Now I'm going to give you a couple of examples to kind of lock this idea down, okay? And by the way, I don't think only a few times in my history have I had a full-blown unlimited power of attorney for an owner. One was on the mission field for 2 years, had no way to talk to me and had nobody to stand in their place. So they signed a very broad power of attorney. If the house needed a new roof, I made that decision. If we needed to evict a tenant, I made that decision. If we need to put in a new furnace, I made that decision. I had a full-blown broad power of attorney. Most property managers aren't doing that. I had another instance when I did that for about 5 years. I had a client who was incarcerated in a federal penitentiary for 5 years. That probably speaks to the kind of clientele that I had. But this person was completely out of touch for 5 years. And so he gave me a much broader power of attorney. It's not what we're talking about. We're talking about the power of attorney given to us in the management agreement so that we can make some decisions on behalf of the owner. So that's why you need to talk about agency, because it means different things to different people in different situations. Now, let me give you an example, kind of lock this down. Regarding approving and denying applicants, okay? If you're kind of the small A agent, your management agreement might read like this. Agent is to pull the background information and forward it to the owner for approval and denial. In other words, kind of like a listing agent. I'm going to pull the information, the background information on the tenant, and I'm going to turn something over to the owner for them to make the decision, okay? If you're at the other end of the scale, you might say, agent is to pull the background information and approve and deny all applicants. Well, that's somebody that's kind of on the higher end, the different end of that agency scale in terms of how much authority they have. Most people, and this is the way Crown did it for 25 years, our language read something like this. Agent is to pull the background information and approve and deny based on the agent's long-standing qualifying guidelines. Any applicant that falls outside of those guidelines will be deferred to the owner for consideration. In other words, if they were kind of a conforming applicant, we made the decision. If somebody came in and they had 2 horses, or let's say they had a 700 credit score but a recent bankruptcy, or an 800 credit score and a recent foreclosure, happens all the time. Or if somebody came in and they had great credit but no employment income. They got a bunch of money in the bank, but they have no employment verifiable income. There are situations where there were 3 pets, or maybe there were two families moving into the house, something that was kind of outside the standard qualifying guidelines, we would go to the owner for those situations, talk it through with the owner, make sure the owner was okay with it. So one agent says, I turn everything over to the owner for approval and denial. A big agent says, I'll take care of it, don't worry about it. In the middle kind of says, if it fits, kind of standard, we'll do it. If there's something kinky about it, we'll confer with the owner and engage the owner in that conversation. Here's another example that'll kind of stretch this out a little bit, give you a little better understanding of it. Managing multiple applications, okay? Let's talk about that. If a small A agent would go something like this, agent will present all applicants to the owner. Usually sales brokers do this because they remember the rule with the real estate commission that says the agent must present all offers to the owner. Well, that's if you're a small A agent and doing listing and selling. If in the management agreement you have the authority to approve some of those, do those multiple guidelines or multiple applications, then you handle it a little differently. A big agent would say something like this, would say, agents may manage multiple applications and approve and deny based on the best qualification. In other words, I'm not going to engage the owner when there's multiple applications. That would be crazy, drive you nuts. And so we would have, on a weekend, we'd have 3 or 4 applications on the same house. The owner's paying us to make those decisions. All right? Now, we're going to take about a 5-second break. I'm going to get the throat lozenge because I'm kind of raspy, and then we'll pick up the rest of this discussion. Don't go away. Okay, well, we're back. Thanks for hanging out with us. Let's continue this conversation and let's describe, I want to tease out a little bit this area, a little more information about a big A, small A agent, okay? So if you're kind of coming out of the brokerage community, you're going to think of yourself in a broker style as a small A agent. If you come out of the property management community, you think a little bit more like this. I call that the manager style, okay? Now, if you're locked into a sales mindset, if you kind of do property management as a sideline, kind of as you manage houses to incubate them for future sales, then you're going to act all across the board as a small A agent. You're going to make the argument that you don't make any decisions for the owner, you go to the owner. There's a very large real estate company in this town that says, I'm just a facilitator, we're just an advisor to the owner. So we pull the information from the owner, we assess it, and we give a little information to the owner, and we have them deny or approve the application. They can deny an 800 credit score if they want. They can approve a 500 credit score if they want. We don't care, we're just a facilitator. And if you're kind of locked into a sales mindset, many managers are, you're going to operate that way, okay? You're going to operate way down this way. However, the executing leases is another example. Now I'm going to take this idea, okay, and I'm going to give you another example how it works out with executing leases. Now, if you come out of the brokerage community and you're kind of a small A agent, then the language in your management agreement will read something like this. Owner shall be identified in the lease as the landlord, and the owner is going to execute the lease agreement. There are managers all across the country who say, I'll sign the lease, I'm not making any promises to the tenant. The owner is the landlord in the lease, and the owner is making the promises to the tenant. Now there's half the people do it that way, half the people do it another way. So let's keep teasing this out, okay? A big A agent would say, to protect the owner and maintain the privacy, the lease is between the agent, identified as the manager, and the tenant. In other words, this is what Crown did for 25 years. We said, we signed a management agreement with the owner, and then we kind of said, Mr. Owner, go away. We'll execute the lease with the tenant. And for 25 years, I mean 3,000 owners and 8,000 tenants, we stood in the owner's shoes under a limited power of attorney. We executed the lease. The tenant had a lease with us. They didn't have a lease with the owner. For some of you, that would rock your world. I mean, I just see hairs on the back of your neck going up, and I feel your tension because you would never think of doing it that way. And that's okay. Here's the thing I want to make a point of. We all do it a little differently, and yet 80–90% of us adopt a standard form from our trade association that kind of does it another way. And the model that we use across the country is very different, across Georgia is very different, but we're all kind of trying to hobble our way into the same management agreement, the one that we can pull out of the forms drawer with the state association. Makes property management much, much harder. So the small A agent would say the owner is going to sign the lease. The big A agent might say, no, the manager is going to sign the lease with the tenant. And now here's a third option, because people do it a lot of different ways. Okay, here's the third option. It says the lease is between the owner, identified as the landlord, and the tenant, and the agent shall execute the lease on behalf of the owner under a limited power of attorney. In other words, there's a whole other group in the industry that says, once we approve the application, we as the agent are going to sign under a limited power of attorney and obligate the owner. And so the owner's name is in the lease as the landlord, and he's making a commitment, promises to the tenant who signs the lease, and then the property manager executes on behalf of the owner, just like going to a real estate closing. And so even though the state association forms kind of proposes it one way, there's really 3 different ways. There's probably 4 or 5 different ways, because managers do this very different. Okay, so let's go back to our discussion about small A, big A agent. Okay, but again, we call this the broker style. We call this the manager style. Okay, now experience in the business is one of the things that dramatically changes identification between who operates as a big A agent and who operates as a small A agent. Here's what we see happening pretty regularly. If you come out of the brokerage business, okay, and if you're new at the business, you're going to have a tendency to operate down in this end of the spectrum. You're going to say, I don't want to make this decision. It's not my call. I'm just an advisor to the owner. And those who are newer in the business operate down here. The more you learn about property management, the more owners' decisions get you in trouble. The more you experience some of the hazards and carnage of the property management industry, the more you're going to work up at this end. Because there were times when we were getting 70, 80, 90, 100 applications a month. It would have been insane for us to try to go to the owner and get approvals or denials. It would have been crazy to go to the owners and have every one of them execute the lease. There were years we were doing 40, 50, 60 leases a month. To go to the owner to get them to approve, to go to the owner to execute the lease, that works on a small volume. That works when you're managing 30 or 50 or 70 properties. But if you want to build a scalable business, something that will go at 100 miles an hour the way it's going today at 50 miles an hour, you've got to have a customized lease. You've got to kind of work toward this end of the spectrum and make more decisions for the owner. Now, give you another example, just kind of lock this down. Handling maintenance, okay? A small A agent, their management agreement would read something like this. Agent will notify the owner when maintenance issues arise. In other words, I'm just a scribe, I'm just a communicator here. A big A agent would say the agent will manage all maintenance. Now, there are some people that do that as a regular part of their business, okay? What Crown did is kind of in the middle. Agents shall handle normal maintenance breakdown under $300, $500, $700, whatever number you like, and engage the owner on amounts over that. In other words, we had a limited power of attorney, and under maintenance, we handle all the nuisance stuff, let's say under $400. If it got to be big ticket stuff, we would engage the owner. So not all property managers do it the same way. And that's just why, again, you need a customized management agreement to make it work. Now, when do you defer to the owner? That's a question that obviously you would want to ask. And here's some of the things, and we got a big long list that we came up with over the years, and it morphed and changed. But here's some of the things. When somebody had low credit, when somebody had maybe a double deposit or a cosigner, when somebody had a foreclosure but a 700 credit score, we would go to the owner, kind of an odd situation. When there were 3 pets or more, a llama or a horse or a miniature pig, something weird, we'd go to the owner, we'd confer with the owner before we made that decision. They had assets but no income. The tenant was related to one of our staff. we would go to the owner in that case because it fell outside of kind of a normal qualifying process. If they were using the house as a movie set, we had that twice in the last 20 years. Or if they were running an Amway business or a New Skin or a Shackley or some kind of small business out of the house, a daycare center or something, we'd go to the owner for that. We felt like that was outside of our scope of authority, so we would go to the owner, okay? But here's the key. You need standard qualifying guidelines in order to make all of these decisions for approving and denying applicants. So we're kind of back to our original conversation now, and it says our standard guidelines must be in writing. They must be applied consistently across the board to all tenants. We must press for objectivity. Don't want to be subjective. Don't want to see a picture of the applicant before we make our decision. Don't want to have any communication, go out to lunch with them. We got to make them strictly on objective criteria. And then we need to prepare to defend ourselves for a fair housing claim. So, back to our original myth, which read something like this. As an agent of the owner, a professional property manager should defer to the owner to approve and deny applications for rent, right? Well, the fact of the matter is, that's wrong. Now, here's what happens, and here's what you have to be very careful of. If you defer to the owner and things go south, let's say you get a fair housing claim, or you defer to the owner and they make a bad decision and things don't go well and there's lawsuit, this is likely what it's going to happen, what it's going to look like. The manager is put out to deal with the tenant and things don't go real well. In comes the owner, and the owner is going to stab the manager in the back. It has happened so many times in this business. The owner will stand in front of the judge and say, Your Honor, I used a professional manager so that these kinds of things would not happen. And look at what happened. It's the manager's fault. So you have to be very careful in this business not to let the owners bully you into certain decisions or into caving in and following their guidelines when you know they're wrong. Because the owner will turn their back on you in a heartbeat, blame you for things that you should have done correctly, and the courts will agree with them. Now, we have a whole section on our website for qualifying guidelines. You go to trainingpropertymanagers.com, go under resources, and you'll find a whole section that will help you define your qualifying guidelines. So also stay with us on Twitter at Crown on the Web. We're keeping loading all kinds of good stuff on our website for you to download and help you survive in the business and prosper. Well, that was a long one. Thanks for hanging out with us today.